I absolutely love finding old toy industry catalogs that give us some insight into some of the older toy lines. And this one's one of my particular favorites. I got in a new catalog from Coleco, so today let's see what we can find out about Starcom. Okay, for those of you unfamiliar with Starcom, first of all, sorry that you've come this far without knowing about Starcom, which is, in my opinion, still the most underappreciated toy line of the 80s. But if you don't know about it, basically it is a spaceship toy line where the vehicles would have a wind-up mechanism inside them, and the wind-up motors were either activated by a button or by magnets that would be located on other vehicles or on the feet of the figures. As far as the figures go, there are basically only 6 different sculpts. Now, there eventually was a 7th, we'll get to that later. But there were 6 different sculpts, 3 for the good guys, 3 for the bad guys, and each of those sculpts represented one division of their team. The best source for these so far, by far, has been this 1988 toy catalog from Coleco, not to be confused with the 1988 Games and Preschool catalog. It's the 1988 toy catalog that we should look at for most of the Starcom unreleased stuff, because as you may or may not know, Coleco went out of business not long after this catalog would have been produced. So while the Starcom toy line did come to North America in 1987, in 1988, it became incredibly difficult to find any of the new product. As a matter of fact, a lot of people, whenever I first got online, a lot of people who are fans of Starcom didn't even know that there was product in the United States in 1988 that was new. I can remember describing what was the Tornado gunship to a number of people, and people were calling me out saying, yeah, you're just making that up. I wasn't making it up. These things were produced and available, I think, a little bit easier in Canada than they were in the United States, and definitely easier to find in Europe, because after everything shut down in the United States, Mattel actually continued to release Starcom figures throughout Europe into the early 90s. So there were 37 figures produced in the United States. That includes any of the figures that were on single cards and any of the figures that were released with vehicles. While a lot of people don't realize it, the single-carded figures actually have a vehicle designation associated with them. So the color scheme of most of the single-carded figures, the suits actually match one of the figures that was included inside a vehicle, because the idea is that they form a little squad that goes with that particular item. In addition to the 37 of them that were released in the United States, there were 12 of them that were then later released in Europe. And the one that I mentioned earlier that was the 7th sculpt was a unique sculpt. He was never repainted again in the toy line. It is Emperor Dark. And Emperor Dark was the leader of the bad guys that was developed very well in the cartoon. He's kind of a scientist. He's up to some very mysterious things. And he definitely, I could say with certainty that he was released in Europe, but it really looks like he was not released in the United States, because whenever these first started showing up online on eBay back in the late 90s, there was a story that went along with them that they were mail-ins, that this was overstock from a mail-in promotion. But as I said, I was a huge fan of Starcom at the time. I was going to the aisles all the time, and yeah, I couldn't find this stuff in 1988, but I don't remember any sort of promotion going on at all. And since then, I couldn't find even any kind of package insert offering Emperor Dark. So it kind of led me to wonder, well, was he released in the United States or was he not? But I can tell you for sure that he was released in Europe, because the second series stuff, Coleco made the decision to cut the figures from being included inside those, but they were actually tossing figures that were single-packed figures or whatever inside as a surprise bonus on some of them, and then on other packages you'd actually see a sticker that says includes figure, just to try to get a figure with each vehicle. And I actually opened up a European boxed Shadow Bandit is what it was, and inside I got an Emperor Dark. So I know for sure that he was released in Europe. And other than this 1988 Coleco toy catalog, which would have been something given just to retailers in order to get them interested in buying products to sell to customers, the place where you as a customer could have potentially seen some of these unproduced characters would have been only in Canada, where they actually inserted a Series 2 vehicle catalog, which at the bottom of it actually showed off the package art for some of the figures that never came out. And the other place that I want to point out where you may actually be looking at some of the unproduced figures is on the vehicle and playset boxes themselves from the second series. You can tell that the figure that was intended to go with that vehicle is pictured, because in Starcom, if you have a figure that comes with a vehicle, the vehicle has its own symbol, and that figure has that symbol on his helmet. So you can kind of pair up which figure kind of went with which vehicle, and then from there, with that color palette, you could almost imagine which figure would have been potentially single-carded to be sold as a support character for that vehicle. So, now that I babbled on forever, let's actually dig into the catalog that I am so excited about to present today. It's really a thin one again. I keep on lucking into these catalogs that are rare, but they're not very thick. As a matter of fact, as far as Starcom goes, there are really only 4 pages in here that are of interest. The first one shows a bunch of the new vehicles that were going to come out, along with some figures that were unproduced. And while that's really unfortunate, they're only on there kind of to show off the features of the vehicle. The second page, I think, is kind of significant, because if you look at the Shadow Bandit, this is really easy to kind of just gloss on by, which is what I did at first, but then as I was scanning it in, I said, hey, this vehicle, the Shadow Bandit, does not look to be purple as it was when it was released. It certainly looks to me like this is black. And you can see in the same page, there's actually a brown vehicle and some other stuff that indicates to me that this is not just bad color correction, that this probably, this early on, would have been black, which kind of would have made sense, because it's a flying vehicle, and the ones that flew quite often were that color. I think that in the cartoon, the black vehicles were depicted as purple, as to set them apart from space during animation, so it makes sense to me that maybe they were planning on having the Shadow Bandit also be a black vehicle to match the vehicles that had already come out, and then realized it was going to be purple in the cartoon anyway, so let's go ahead and make the toy purple. It's my guess. I'm just kind of throwing in some conjecture there. But on page 3, this is where we really get into some of the figures and some of the little bits of information that I can kind of pull out from this. So I'm going to skip over the figures that were released in Europe but were not released in the United States. So let's just look at the ones that weren't released at all anywhere. And let's start with Bear. Bear is there on the right in orange with brown boots. He is an Astro Marine. He was depicted with his package art inside that Canadian catalog. Then we have Hawk. I really like this design because they went with kind of a different set of paint applications and were painting the gloves. This picture is good because previously the picture was kind of grainy, and we did have his art inside that Canadian catalog. But this time we can actually see that his gloves kind of match his helmet in this grayish silver color. Moving on to the bad guys, let's take a look first at Lieutenant Zortek. Zortek is this silver and black robot drone, and there's not too much to say about him other than the fact that he did appear inside that other catalog, but strangely, I really don't see Lieutenant Zortek anywhere around on the previous pages operating any of the vehicles, so very, very strange one. Then we have Sergeant Major Targon, who did appear as well inside that Canadian catalog with his art, and also appears several times in the vehicle page. Apparently kids couldn't get enough of those robot drones, and they definitely were going to repaint that one several more times. Here is Sergeant Major Ivok, who I kind of couldn't tell in the older picture if he had a silver head or if it was white. I kind of thought maybe it was white, but then I thought maybe it was just the reflection of light. But this catalog thankfully shows us clearly Sergeant Major Ivok has a silver chest, but a white head. Then you have Captain Panic. He actually was not depicted in the Canadian catalog, but he was inside the 1988 toy catalog from Coleco. Then at the bottom here, I kind of skipped over the only other good guy figure that went unreleased, and that is Ranger. Ranger is a strange one because he did not appear in the Canadian catalog, but he did actually appear on the back of some packages in Europe. So it's a very strange thing that Ranger looks like he almost was released by Mattel in Europe, but for some reason he wasn't. He was inside some of the toy catalogs they released as well, and they seemed to be very careful to not show any of the figures that they didn't plan on releasing. And yet Ranger just keeps popping up here and there. I don't know why this one, of all of the unproduced figures, seems to be the one that came the closest to coming out. The one that came the closest to not being released is pictured with him in a 3-pack, because the Starcom 3-packs, they actually were proposed a couple of different times. They do appear inside the 88 catalog, and pictured there with Ranger and Lone Wolf is Bomber. Now, Bomber is a strange one because I mentioned earlier that some of the European vehicles would actually have a random figure tossed inside. While Bomber was not advertised in anything, and you couldn't get him in a single pack, sometimes if you opened up a European Starhawk SFB, you would actually have either the figure Jeff Bronx Carrier that came with it in the United States, or you would have Bomber, or sometimes you would have both. His boots are white in this picture. They were white in the picture of him in the 3-pack in the 1988 toy catalog, but the figure that actually came out did not have white boots. The other thing that I think is interesting in here, as far as pointing out differences on some of the figures, is probably up there on Yank. Yank is, I think, significantly different than the figure that came out. And some of that could actually be due to what I said earlier. One version of the figure could have been intended to be the pilot of one of the ships that came out, and the other one may have been support crew, which would have been intended to be released without a vehicle, either as a single pack or in a 2-pack. So I mentioned that there would be some interesting stuff in here, and there is, but you really have to kind of look closely. Because if you blow up that shot of the Starcom 3-pack here to 600 DPI, you can actually read what it says underneath each of them. And there are 2, count them 2, names of characters that didn't actually come out. On the left we have Hotshot, and I believe if I try to read what it says underneath him, it says Hotshot, Captain Steve Stockton, Starwing, includes some kind of pistol and hypervolt power pack. I imagine we could figure out what kind of pistol that is based on the fact that they weren't creating any new pistols and they had names for all of them. And this, of course, is a Dash Derringer figure that is just being used as a placeholder, but that's kind of what we've seen on all of these 3-packs. They're just kind of mocked up, and they include real names and real figures, but the names and figures don't match necessarily who they are. And then to the right, we have Captain Ton, who would have been a robot drone. And I don't know what the deal is with Hotshot and Captain Ton, but I really like to imagine that maybe, just maybe, those are the names that correspond to some of those characters that are on the box art, and that's the reason why I put you through that big explanation toward the beginning, is that I kind of wanted to set up what I think these may be. There's also the possibility that those names were just names that didn't pass legal, that they proposed those and they thought that they were going to use them for a figure, and then they ended up going with something else. I probably should mention that Emperor Dark was intended, as far as the 1988 catalog is concerned, he was intended to be included in a 3-pack, but it's very strange. Definitely feels shoehorned inside the catalog, because they show all the pictures of all the figures and exactly what the pack out was going to be. And then at the bottom it says, and includes Emperor Dark. So I don't exactly know if he was going to be in a future wave, or if they were just going to bump somebody from one of the 3-packs and include him instead, because it would have been a much more unique figure to have on shelves. But they definitely had some kind of plan in place. But lending evidence to the long-standing rumor is the 4th page here, which I did take the time to read it. This advertising and promotional support page, they're usually quite boring and they don't have anything in them. But the most interesting thing is, if you look here in green, you can actually see that it says that the legend actually says that green from February through May of 1988 would include an Emperor Dark promotion. So that really lends to evidence that Emperor Dark was indeed intended to be a mail-in. So whoever was selling those on eBay in the late 90s, they were correct. That was a canceled mail-in figure. But at the same time, later in 1988, they were changing gears and planning on wedging him into a 3-pack and putting him at retail. Neither of those things happened, because I think that by the time this catalog came out, according to this one, he should have already been offered to kids as some sort of mail-in. But as I said, I don't remember that at all. And I have not been able to find any evidence about it other than what's inside that catalog. I think that for the fact that I've covered all this, I kind of would be remiss if I didn't also mention some of the vehicles and playsets that were unproduced for Starcom, since I probably won't do a whole episode just on those. But there was the Starcom Double Fighter. Mattel did not release this in Europe, and I have to think that that's probably because tooling didn't exist yet. If you look at the picture of it in the catalog, it is definitely handmade. And the other two are the Big Cannon Fortress and the Missile Station. And both of those appear to be retooled versions of the playsets that had already come out. And the two of those also canceled. I would imagine that the retooled pieces probably never ended up being tooled. And so that's probably why we did not get them. So what do you think? Have you ever heard in any other place where Emperor Dark was actually solicited as a mail-in? I would love to see a physical offer, whether or not it was in a comic book or a newspaper or a commercial or anything else that you may have. If anyone has seen that, please let me know, because any little snippet of information is something that I would love to see. In addition to that, what do you think about the repaints that did not come out? Starcom is still, for me, the most underappreciated toy line of the 1980s. I absolutely love it and am amazed at how many people aren't die-hard fans. But let me know what you think in the comments, and thanks again.
Thanks for watching this episode of Articulated Points. We hope you enjoyed it, and we'd appreciate it if you would like, share, and subscribe. If you'd like to learn more about some of the toys featured in this episode, or want to follow us on social media, links are in the description below this video.